Comrades, awaken from your slumber. Look around you at the cities, the factories, the offices where you toil day after day, often unaware that every hour of labor, every drop of sweat, every beat of your heart is claimed not by necessity, but by an invisible hand that serves the few. These are the chains that bind you, not of iron, not of wood, but of money, of social norms, and of a system designed to render you dependent, powerless, and obedient. You call it life, I call it servitude. The rulers of this world, the bourgeoisie, have perfected a subtle tyranny. They do not need to brand you or lock you in dungeons. Instead, they enshroud their domination in ideology, in culture, in the very language you speak. They make you believe that wealth is earned by genius, that poverty is the fault of the poor, that obedience is virtue and dissent is sin. They hide behind the facade of democracy and freedom, while your labor, the very force that creates value, is stolen from you in plain sight. The invisible chains of capitalism are crafted from your exploitation, your alienation, your submission to a system that measures life in profit and loss, rather than dignity and justice. Consider what it means to live under these chains. You rise in the morning to work, not for yourself, but for the accumulation of wealth that you will never touch. You are alienated from the products of your labor. What you create enriches your oppressor, not your family, not your community, not yourself. The machine of production, the marketplace, and the office all are arenas in which your freedom is denied and your creativity imprisoned. You are reduced to a commodity, sold by the hour, judged by output, not by your humanity. And yet, you are told to be grateful for having a job, for being employed, for surviving. But survival is not freedom. Survival is the cage in which they have placed you. The capitalist system thrives on division. It isolates you from your fellow workers, from those who share your struggle, and teaches you to compete rather than to unite. It tells the man in the factory to despise the laborer in the field, the worker in the office, to envy the worker in the factory, and all of you to accept your place as though it were natural. But there is nothing natural about oppression. It is manufactured, maintained, and enforced by a class that fears your awareness, that fears your unity, and that fears your action. Awareness alone, however, is insufficient. You must organize. You must recognize that your chains are collective, and therefore the key to breaking them lies in collective action. The power of the working class is immense when it is united, when it refuses the lies that justify inequality, when it stands as a single force capable of demanding justice. You are not powerless, you are merely unorganized. You are not voiceless, you are misdirected. When laborers, peasants, artisans, and all those who toil come together, the foundations of the capitalist system tremble. And why must you act? Because time is not neutral each day you endure, each hour you toil under exploitation. You perpetuate the system that enslaves you. The bourgeoisie counts on your inertia, they count on your resignation. They count on your belief that the world cannot be changed. But history teaches otherwise. Every great transformation in human society was born from the refusal to accept oppression, from the courage to unite, and for the determination to reclaim what was stolen. The invisible chains will not break on their own. They demand recognition and resistance. They demand that you, the working class, understand your historical role not as mere victims, but as the architects of liberation. Your labor is the source of all wealth. Your solidarity is the weapon that can dismantle the structures of exploitation. The factories, the banks, the markets, the halls of power all exist because of you. And when you rise together, they crumble. Comrades, look at the world as it is and see it for what it could be. The chains that bind you are not the chains of fate. They are the chains of a system designed to benefit a few at the expense of the many. Cast them off. Educate yourselves, organize, and act. Demand your rights. Seize the wealth that your labor produces, and create a society where life is measured not by profit, but by justice, equality, and human dignity. The hour has come to recognize that your liberation lies not in petitioning those who exploit you, but in standing as one, in reclaiming the power that is already yours by birthright. The invisible chains are strong only because you have allowed them to be invisible. Shine the light of awareness upon them, and the chains will become visible, and once visible, they can be broken. Rise, comrades. The future does not belong to the idle, to the complacent, or to those who accept suffering as inevitable. It belongs to those who dare to act, to unite, and to seize it. History is not written by those who endure oppression. It is written by those who refuse it, who smash the chains of exploitation, and who build a world where the labor of many benefits all. The invisible chains that shape your life are powerful, yes, but your collective will, your consciousness, and your solidarity are more powerful still. Cast off the illusion of inevitability. Seize your power. Reclaim your labor. Reshape society. Capitalism does not enslave through the overt, visible chains of old tyranny, nor through the direct application of force alone. Its mastery is far subtler, more insidious, and more complete because it operates through invisible chains, chains forged in exploitation, alienation, and ideology. These chains are the foundation of a system designed to extract the maximum profit from human labor while maintaining the illusion of freedom and opportunity. The worker rises each day believing that they are free to choose their path, free to pursue success, free to determine their own destiny, but in reality their choices are circumscribed by the structural forces of capital. Every moment of labor, every skill, every creative effort is measured, commodified, and appropriated to serve the interests of the few who control the means of production. The worker produces not for themselves, not for the flourishing of their community, but to fill the coffers of a class whose wealth is predicated on the subordination of the many. This is exploitation in its purest form, the transfer of the value created by human effort into the hands of those who did not create it, those who stand above the productive process, insulated from its hardships and enriched by its results. Alienation compounds this exploitation. The worker is separated from the product of their labor, stripped of ownership, and estranged from the act of creation itself. The fruits of human ingenuity and effort, instead of serving the worker's needs or enriching their life, are alien and external, belonging to the capitalist who purchased their labor power. The factory, the office, the field, or the workshop becomes a space of estrangement, or the worker encounters their own labor as an object that has been taken from them, and in which their capacity for creativity is reduced to a commodity bought and sold in the market. This alienation extends beyond mere material production. It penetrates the worker's sense of self, their connection to community, and their perception of life's purpose. The more the worker produces, the less they possess. The more they contribute to society, the more society exploits them. The very act that should bring fulfillment and meaning instead becomes a mechanism of control, a reminder that under capitalism, humanity itself is subordinated to profit. Yet exploitation and alienation alone would not be sustainable without the third chain, ideology. The capitalist system sustains itself not merely by seizing material wealth, but by shaping thought, perception, and belief. The worker is led to accept inequality as natural, poverty as inevitable, and their subordinate status as deserved or unavoidable. Ideology cloaks the mechanisms of domination in narratives of meritocracy, competition, and freedom, convincing the exploited that they are free while they toil under constraints invisible to the untrained eye. Religion, education, media, and culture are enlisted to reinforce these illusions, teaching obedience, normalizing exploitation, and suppressing critical awareness. In this way, the chains of capitalism are internalized. The worker becomes complicit in their own subjugation, consenting to a system that strips them of dignity and autonomy. The domination is thus total, not only external but internal, and its grip is reinforced at every level of thought, desire, and aspiration. The cumulative effect of these three forces, exploitation, alienation, and ideology, is the creation of a population conditioned to accept servitude as freedom, deprivation as virtue, and obedience as morality. It is a system in which the worker produces the very conditions of their own subordination. They labor to sustain an apparatus that benefits others, and in doing so, they are denied both material and spiritual satisfaction. Their daily reality is constrained by economic necessity, while their imagination aspirations, and critical faculties are constrained by social norms and ideological constructs. Under this invisible tyranny, the worker's potential is never realized, their creativity is harnessed to generate value for another, and their humanity is subordinated to the logic of capital. Capitalism's invisible chains are therefore not merely economic, they are psychological, social, and cultural. They render the worker complicit in their oppression, while simultaneously depriving them of the means to resist it. Only by recognizing these chains, by tracing the mechanisms of exploitation, by understanding the depth of alienation, and by exposing the ideological forces at work, can the worker begin to see the possibility of liberation. Awareness becomes the first step toward dismantling the system. For the invisible is only invincible until it is brought into light, until its mechanisms are understood, analyzed, and confronted. It is in this confrontation that the working class can recognize its own power, its collective strength, and its potential to overthrow the structures that bind it, reclaim its labor, and transform society into one that prioritizes human need, creativity, and dignity over profit and domination. In the heart of the capitalist system lies a profound mechanism of control, the separation of workers from the products of their labor. This is not a simple matter of ownership, it is the deliberate estrangement of the worker from the very fruits of their effort, designed to strip them of agency, diminish their power, and prevent solidarity. When a worker labors in a factory, a workshop, or an office, the product of that labor does not belong to them. It becomes the property of the capitalist, a commodity to be sold for profit, while the worker receives only a wage a fraction of the value they create, a token that sustains their survival but not their dignity. This separation is not accidental. It is the very foundation of exploitation. The more the worker produces, the less they control, and the more the capitalist gains. The labor that should nourish and empower the individual instead becomes a tool of subjugation, a mechanism by which their potential is harnessed for the benefit of another, and their identity is reduced to a mere function in the machinery of production. But the alienation of labor extends beyond material possession. It strikes at the core of human relationships and collective power. When workers are detached from the products of their labor, they are also detached from one another. Each worker sees only the demands of their own survival, the wage that will sustain their family, the tasks assigned by management, and the pressures of a system that measures worth in output rather than humanity. The capitalist system thrives on this isolation, fostering competition among workers rather than cooperation. Promotions, bonuses, contracts, and even basic survival are made contingent upon outperforming one's peers. Workers are pitted against each other, encouraged to see fellow laborers not as comrades in shared struggle, but as rivals to be surpassed, obstacles in a zero-sum contest dictated by the logic of profit. In this way, capitalism weaponizes scarcity and division, ensuring that those who should be united in pursuit of justice are instead preoccupied with the illusion of individual advancement. This competition is a powerful tool of ideological control. By convincing workers that success is a matter of personal skill, talent, or cunning, the system obscures the structural forces that dictate their reality. Workers are led to blame themselves for their struggles, their lack of opportunity, or their marginalization, rather than the system that exploits their labor and severs their bonds with one another. The focus on individual achievement masks the collective nature of labor itself. No product, no service, no infrastructure exists without the coordinated effort of many hands, yet the fruits of that collective effort are claimed by a few. In isolating the worker, capitalism ensures that the recognition of shared oppression is delayed, weakened, or prevented entirely. The worker internalizes the division, perpetuating the hierarchy that oppresses them, and the capitalist order is strengthened through this manufactured disunity. The consequences of this separation are profound. Workers are denied not only the material rewards of their labor, but also the psychological and social satisfaction that comes from seeing one's work realized in the world, the sense of accomplishment, the pride in creating, and the recognition of one's contribution to society are all redirected to the capitalist who profits from it. The worker's labour becomes an external force, something alien and imposed, rather than an expression of human creativity and capability. This alienation is not merely an economic condition, it is a social and moral one, eroding trust, empathy, and the bonds that could otherwise unite the working class in common purpose. Yet, within this separation lies also the potential for consciousness. When the worker begins to see that their labour is appropriated, that competition is engineered, and that the products of their toil enrich others while leaving them dependent, a realization emerges: the system is not natural, it is designed, and it can be resisted. The recognition that workers are artificially divided, that competition is a tool of domination, and that unity is the path to empowerment becomes the foundation for collective action. Workers who understand the mechanics of alienation and division can organize, educate, and mobilize, turning the instruments of oppression into the instruments of liberation. For when workers reclaim the products of their labor not necessarily in literal ownership alone, but in control, dignity, and purpose, they also reclaim the bonds with one another, transforming isolated effort into coordinated power capable of challenging the structures of exploitation. Awareness is the spark that illuminates oppression, but it is not the fire that burns it away. To see clearly the mechanisms of exploitation, the alienation imposed upon labour, and the subtle chains of ideology is necessary, yet it is not sufficient. Consciousness alone cannot dismantle the structures of power. Knowledge without action remains inert, a lamp that illuminates the walls of a prison but cannot open the door. The capitalist system thrives because awareness is fragmented, incomplete, or unaccompanied by collective will. A worker may recognize their exploitation, may understand the alienation of labor and the concentration of wealth in the hands of the bourgeoisie, and yet, if they remain isolated, powerless, or unorganized, their knowledge is insufficient to effect change. Awareness must become action, and action must be united, deliberate, and conscious. Solidarity is the bridge that transforms understanding into power. Individual knowledge of oppression carries little weight against a system that is structurally reinforced and defended by those who hold economic, political, and social dominance. The capitalist apparatus relies upon the disunity of workers, upon the illusion that struggle is personal rather than collective. A single worker, no matter how aware, is like a solitary thread in a vast net, easily broken, easily ignored, and ultimately insufficient to challenge the machine of exploitation. It is when these threads are woven together, when individual consciousness is joined in mutual purpose and coordinated struggle, that the latent power of the working class becomes manifest. The act of organizing is therefore not a mere strategy, it is the very mechanism by which oppression is confronted and overturned. Collective organization does not merely amplify voice, it transforms it. It converts the isolated murmurs of grievance into a chorus of demand, into a force capable of challenging entrenched privilege and disrupting the operations of capital. The assembly of workers, the formation of unions, councils, and federations, the deliberate coordination of action, all serve to unite fragmented awareness into coherent, strategic resistance. Without such organization, awareness remains theoretical, a contemplation of injustice that produces moral indignation but cannot alter material conditions. The capitalist system has learned to tolerate critique, to allow intellectual dissent, and even to co-opt awareness into acceptable channels, as long as it does not manifest as collective action. Only unity, therefore, breaks the illusion that individuals are powerless, demonstrating instead that the working class possesses the capacity to seize control over their labor, their environment, and ultimately, their society. Solidarity is more than coordination, it is the moral and psychological glue that sustains struggle. To be aware is to feel the weight of exploitation, the injustice of inequality, and the indignity of alienation. But these insights, when faced alone, can produce despair, resignation, or cynicism. Solidarity counteracts this by offering mutual support, shared purpose, and collective determination. Workers who act together draw strength from one another, recognize that their struggle is shared, and learn that the chains of capital are maintained not by inevitability, but by the disunity of those they seek to dominate. In this sense, solidarity is both defensive and offensive. It protects against the isolation that weakens resolve, and it empowers coordinated action that challenges and dismantles oppressive structures. History demonstrates that social transformation is never the work of isolated awareness. Revolutions, labor movements, and social uprisings are born from the union of consciousness and organization. The knowledge of injustice must evolve into strategy, and strategy must be enacted collectively. Awareness without solidarity can illuminate reality, but it cannot alter it. Solidarity without awareness risks directionless action, easily co-opted or suppressed. The synthesis of both the conscious, deliberate, and united effort of the working class is what produces transformative power. It is the conscious recognition that liberation is not given, that rights are not granted voluntarily by those who benefit from oppression, and that collective effort is the essential vehicle for achieving justice and equality. Thus, awareness is the first step, but it must be inseparable from organized solidarity. To awaken to the reality of exploitation is necessary, but to act together, to coordinate struggle, to form bonds that convert. Understanding into material and social power is essential. The worker who sees the chains of oppression but stands alone may despair. The worker who acts collectively recognizes that their potential is multiplied, that their labor is no longer alienated but directed toward liberation, and that the structures of capitalist domination can be confronted and transformed through unified action. The path from consciousness to freedom is therefore paved not by knowledge alone, but by the deliberate, organized, and solidaristic efforts of those who refuse to endure oppression and isolation. The power of the working class is not abstract, it is not theoretical, and it is not granted by the benevolence of those who profit from exploitation. It is concrete, it is material, and it resides in the very labor that produces all wealth. Every building, every machine, every invention, every service that sustains society is born of human effort. Yet under capitalism, this power is usurped, concentrated in the hands of the few, and used to dominate the many. The worker creates value, yet the capitalist claims it. The product of labor is alien to the worker, and the surplus generated from toil is appropriated to reinforce the power of a minority. The working class has long been told that this is the natural order of things, that the accumulation of wealth by the few is a reward for genius or diligence, and that their own labor is only a means of survival. But this is illusion. The true source of wealth, and therefore the true source of power, is the working class itself. To reclaim this power requires recognition of what has been taken and the deliberate act of taking it back. The worker must understand that labor is not a commodity to be bought cheaply and sold at a loss for the benefit of others, but the very foundation of social existence. Every hour of labor contains value that is appropriated by the capitalist, and every day spent producing goods and services enriches those who contribute nothing to the labor itself. The moment the working class recognizes this truth, the foundations of capitalism are shaken, for the system depends on the ignorance, division, and submission of those who produce its wealth. Power is not held because it is inherent to the capitalist class, but because the working class has been separated from the control of its labor. When the worker reclaims ownership over their work, when they assert authority over the products, processes, and outcomes of labor, they reclaim the true source of power in society. Control over labor is inseparable from control over wealth. Capital is not a neutral tool, it is a social relation, a means by which one class dominates another. The working class may toil in factories, offices, fields, or workshops, but the accumulation of capital in the hands of the few ensures that the fruits of labor flow upward, rather than toward those who create them. Reclaiming power, therefore, requires the collective assertion that wealth generated by labor should belong to those who labor. This is not charity, and it is not a redistribution granted by the ruling class. It is the recognition of an economic truth that labor is the source of value, and that the appropriation of its surplus by others is theft. By asserting control over wealth, the working class transforms itself from a passive, exploited group into an active, decisive force capable of reshaping society. The act of reclamation is necessarily collective. No single worker, no matter how skilled, can overturn a system designed to suppress collective power. It is the unity of the working class, the coordination of efforts, and the deliberate organization of labor that amplifies the capacity to reclaim control. Unions, councils, cooperatives, and federations are not mere administrative structures, they are instruments of liberation. Through collective ownership, decision-making, and management of production, the working class begins to reverse the flow of power, turning exploitation into empowerment. Every enterprise managed in common, every factory operated by workers for their own benefit, every decision made democratically about production and distribution serves to weaken the dominance of the capitalist class and strengthen the autonomy of labor. Reclaiming control also transforms social consciousness. When laborers see themselves as the rightful controllers of their work and the wealth it produces, alienation diminishes. Work ceases to be a source of estrangement and becomes an act of empowerment. Communities that manage their labor and wealth collectively are not only economically self-sufficient, they are morally and politically liberated. The very act of asserting control over labor undermines the ideological chains imposed by capitalism, for it demonstrates that the hierarchy of power is not natural or inevitable. Power is exercised by those who hold it, and when the working class refuses to cede control, it becomes the decisive force in society. The strength of the working class is therefore immense, for it rests upon the fundamental building blocks of civilization itself. Reclaiming control over labor and wealth is the path to autonomy, dignity, and equality. It is not a concession, it is a restoration of what has been stolen, and it transforms the social order from one of exploitation into one of justice. The worker who seizes this power does not merely change their own circumstances, they challenge the entire structure of capitalist domination, exposing its reliance on division, ignorance, and passivity, and replacing it with a society where labor is both the source of wealth and the instrument of liberation. Liberation is not a passive state, it is not the result of patience, endurance, or the goodwill of those who benefit from oppression. It is a dynamic, active process that requires the conscious refusal of subjugation, the deliberate organization of the oppressed, and the transformation of society through collective effort. To remain silent in the face of exploitation, to accept poverty, alienation, and inequality as inevitable is to consent to one's own domination. True liberation begins with the refusal to endure oppression any longer, with the recognition that the chains that bind the individual are not divine, natural, or unbreakable, but constructed by social and economic forces that can be dismantled through human action. This refusal is not a moment of anger or protest alone. It is a sustained, conscious decision to challenge the structures of power, to assert one's rights, and to reclaim what has been taken. Refusal alone, however, is insufficient if it remains isolated. Individual defiance, though morally significant, is easily neutralized by a system designed to maintain control through fragmentation, competition, and ideological domination. Capitalism thrives because it turns the oppressed against one another, promoting distrust, envy, and the illusion of scarcity. The worker who refuses oppression in isolation is vulnerable, their strength is diluted, their voice unheard, and their efforts ultimately absorbed into the machinery they seek to resist. This is why unity is indispensable. The oppressed must recognize that their struggle is shared, that the conditions of one are inseparable from the conditions of all, and that only through collective action can the chains of domination be broken. Solidarity transforms scattered resistance into a force capable of challenging entrenched power, amplifying individual courage into collective strength, and converting moral outrage into tangible social change. The act of uniting is itself transformative. When the working class, peasants, artisans, and all who labour come together with common purpose, they reclaim both confidence and capability. They discover that the system which once seemed invincible relies upon their division, and that unity reveals the vulnerability of those who profit from exploitation. Organization allows for the coordination of resources, the strategic deployment of labour, and the creation of structures that can sustain struggle over time. It transforms isolated voices into a collective demand, capable of asserting rights, enforcing justice, and imposing new social relations. Through unification, the oppressed recognize their own agency and learn that liberation is not granted but seized, that it is not a concession from the ruling class but a conquest achieved through shared effort. Action, once united, becomes the instrument by which society itself can be reshaped. Liberation is not merely the removal of chains but the construction of new conditions in which humanity, not profit, dictates the terms of existence. The institutions, norms, and structures that perpetuate oppression must be confronted and transformed. Workplaces, communities, and social systems must be reorganized so that labor benefits those who perform it, rather than a detached few. Education, governance, and resource distribution must be recalibrated to serve collective needs rather than individual greed. The act of reshaping society is both practical and ideological, dismantling the apparatus of domination while instilling a culture of solidarity, equality, and empowerment. Every decision, every policy, every system reformed under the guidance of the organized and conscious masses reinforces liberation and strengthens the ability of the oppressed to sustain it. Yet liberation is not a singular moment or a finite achievement. It is continuous, demanding vigilance, creativity, and commitment. The forces of oppression are resilient, adaptive, and persistent, and they will seek to exploit disunity, complacency, and ignorance. Therefore, the struggle must be ongoing, informed by collective learning and strengthened by shared purpose. The refusal of oppression, the act of uniting, and the effort to reshape society are interconnected and mutually reinforcing. One cannot exist without the others. Refusal without unity is impotent, unity without action is inert, and action without vision is directionless. Together, they form a cycle of empowerment, each step building upon the last, each reinforcing the capacity of the working class and the oppressed to assert control over their destiny. Liberation demands courage, insight, and persistence. It requires the oppressed to confront not only the material conditions of exploitation, but also the ideological forces that sustain them, to challenge the narratives, beliefs, and assumptions that justify inequality, and to replace them with principles grounded in justice, solidarity, and human dignity. By refusing oppression, uniting, and actively reshaping society, the working class asserts its historical role, seizes control over the forces that shape life, and transforms the conditions of existence from domination to freedom, from alienation to empowerment, and from inequality to collective justice. Comrades, the chains that bind us are not myths or abstractions, they are real, tangible, and deliberately imposed. Exploitation, alienation, competition, and division have been engineered to keep us powerless while enriching the few. But awareness, solidarity, and collective action illuminate the path from subjugation to liberation. The working class holds within itself the power to reclaim its labor, seize the wealth it creates, and reshape society according to justice, equality, and human dignity. The struggle is not easy, for oppression is persistent and cunning, but it is necessary, and it is inevitable when we recognize our strength and act together. History does not move by chance. It moves through the conscious, organized, and resolute actions of those who refuse to endure injustice. Let us rise not as isolated individuals, but as a united force, refusing to accept the false inevitabilities imposed upon us. Let us organize, educate, and mobilize, transforming awareness into action, and action into lasting change. Let us reclaim what is rightfully ours, our labor, our creativity, and our lives, and turn the instruments of exploitation into instruments of empowerment. The invisible chains that shape our existence can be broken when we act collectively, when we recognize our shared destiny, and when we commit to reshaping society in the image of equality and freedom. Comrades, the time for passivity has ended. The era of endurance is over. The power to dismantle oppression, to reclaim our humanity, and to construct a society where labour serves life rather than profit rests in our hands. We are not victims of circumstance. We are the architects of the future. Stand together, act decisively, and let history witness the rise of a liberated working class that refuses to bow, refuses to endure, and refuses to be silenced. The chains may be invisible, but our power is visible, undeniable, and unstoppable when we unite and move as one.